Welcome to week 5. We are officially, as of week 5, 1/3 of the way through the course. For this week, we're going to be focusing on what we learned last week in week 4 about intuition and our automatic thought processes to the therapeutic setting. So talking about therapy and psychologists and how they interact with their clients and how they think about their clients. So I will go over feedback from week 4 activities, including the online post and the first exam. The announcement that I have this week is that I have shifted Module 11 1 week earlier. So Module 10 was the only one on the syllabus. I did move Module 11 to this week because it fits better with the topic, and that way you have a little lighter load next week. And then I will go over the activities for this week. So looking at the week 4 activity feedback, first I will talk about the online posts. I thought you did an excellent job. You all have many different experiences with social roles and how they influence your behavior, and a number of you pulled in additional concepts from the readings beyond social roles, which is wonderful. Most of you didn't do this, but I wanted to remind you to not include direct quotes. So anything that is 3 or more words taken directly from the textbook, make sure that you're putting everything in your own words. And if you do reference some comment or some statement that Myers made, remember to include up to 4 things in your citation, so in the parentheses. 2 of them are required and 2 of them are optional. So the first thing that's required is the author or author's last name or names. In this case, the book is authored by only one author, so you would just have Myers. Then you would have a comma, and then you list the year of publication, which in this case is 2015. So those are the 2 required parts for any citation that you would include. If you do have a direct quote, or if you would like to provide more information to the reader, then the 2 optional parts are P period and the page number that you pulled that idea or that concept from. And again, you want to make sure that you separate each of these with a comma. And as I mentioned last week, the quotations would go on the inside to the left of the first parenthesis, and then the punctuation, the period, would go on the outside. And feel free to use the Purdue OWL as a reference for any of these notation type examples. So moving on to a couple frequently missed questions from Exam 1. On the left side here, they were actually both from the RAP article, which we looked at the first week of class. And I've listed the questions there with the responses, possible responses, and what I would like to do is I would like to give all of you the opportunity to get some extra credit. So rather than just telling you what the correct answer is, what I would like you to do is to read through the article carefully again and look for concepts that might address those questions. And each of those responses should be somewhere, for that first question at least, should be somewhere in the article. So you can look for where those suggestions are, and if they're in the suggestion that provides effective ways of reducing reliance on misinformation. And for the last one, as a hint, you'll want to look for the option that you can find in the article. So if you send me a message, you can send me an email or a message through Scholar. You can get up to an extra credit point for each of those 2. So you could get up to 2 extra credit points if you get the correct answer. And in order to get the full credit, not only would I like you to give me the response for each of those, but also your rationale. So which one are you choosing and why are you choosing it? And that will also be due Sunday at midnight, along with everything else. So looking at the short answer questions, there were 4 of them. The first question that shows up for me anyway, they were randomly interspersed throughout there, so this won't necessarily be the first question for each of you. But one of the questions, what helps you succeed when you're starting a new hobby? You gave a number of answers, and as with many psychology questions, there can technically be more than one correct response. So in my head, I was thinking self-efficacy. So in the module that talks about self-efficacy, on pages 45 and 46, it talks about how that can help you be successful. And then on page 49, it specifically says that mastery is the best way to increase your self-efficacy. So if you mentioned either mastery or self-efficacy, you got full credit. I actually provided 2 examples of some very good responses for the short answer question. One that dealt with mastery and one that dealt with self-efficacy. Another question asked about the 3 dimensions that are related to the self-serving bias. One is socially desirable, subjective, and common is the 3rd one. There wasn't a lot of explanation for this in the text. And some of you offered some potential explanations. You gave your best shot. So if you have any questions about that particular item, please feel free to email me. I would be happy to discuss it with you. My interpretation of those 3 dimensions, the first, socially desirable. We tend to use the self-serving bias on dimensions where it's some characteristic that is generally considered positive to have socially. So that would be the socially desirable aspect of it. Subjective would be, there isn't necessarily a clear yes or no, black and white answer to whether or not somebody has a particular dimension. One example would be attractiveness. Another would be friendliness. So those things don't have clear definitions necessarily. If you look at something like height, that's definitely more objective. You can measure that. And you can have multiple people measure it and get the same measurement. Whereas if you have multiple people rate attractiveness, there's going to be some variability in what they think is attractive. And common, people tend to apply the self-serving bias to things that people share, a lot of people share. So it's common socially. And the cultural aspect of the self-serving bias, we may not have, or we may not tend to use the self-serving bias with the same characteristics from culture to culture, but the thing that's true cross-culturally is no matter what that characteristic is, it's always socially desirable, it's always subjective, and it's always common. So in a more interdependent or collective culture, the socially desirable, subjective aspect might be being a good child. So being a good daughter, being a good son, taking good care of your parents. In more collective cultures, that's definitely socially desirable, and it's also subjective. So what's a, quote, good child? What are the good behaviors? What are the bad behaviors? Whereas in a more independent culture, something that's socially desirable could be trying to advance at work. So trying to always get the next promotion. So you might think to yourself, yes, I am definitely motivated, I'm definitely assertive. Any of those subjective dimensions or subjective characteristics that would be socially desirable. The question that asked about the differences between the fundamental attribution error and the actor-observer effect. This was a tricky one for some people. And I have a couple images here, a couple tables that help display what the difference is. And if you look at the top right one, here you can see the difference between the two is looking at perceptions of the self. So the fundamental attribution error actually does not explain any perceptions or attributions for our own behavior. So if we are looking at somebody else and we see them behave in a particular way, we're going to tend to make a dispositional attribution for their behavior. So we're going to say, well, they were rude because they are a rude person. So we're going to say it's something about their personality, not they were rude because somebody was rude to them and it put them in a bad mood, to give more of a situational or environmental explanation for their behavior. The actor-observer bias, or the actor-observer effect, has that same explanation for our attributions of other people's behavior, so it's still that dispositional, the personality attribution, but it also includes our explanation for our own behavior, whereas we don't necessarily know why somebody else is doing something because we aren't in their minds, we don't know what they're thinking about. We, of course, do know what we're thinking about, and so we can take into account some of those influences that we wouldn't necessarily be aware of for someone else. And one thing that I would like you to pay special attention to is the differences in attributions for positive and negative behavior, and specifically looking at the meta-analysis that was done in 2006 and how that changed how people explain our own behavior, the attributions for our own behavior. So definitely make a note of that for next time. The textbook is a little misleading. On page 56 it says, we commit the fundamental attribution error when we explain other people's behavior. It should have just stopped there rather than talking about attributions for our own behavior. I think that might have tripped some people up. So the fundamental attribution error is talking only about our attributions for other people's behavior, whereas the actor-observer bias, or the actor-observer effect, has attributions for not only other people's behavior, like the fundamental attribution error, but also attributions for our own behavior. And the fourth short answer question, you all nailed it. You did an excellent job with this. I was really impressed. So you all identified the 3 techniques that can help reduce the overconfidence bias, and those are found on pages 69 and 70. Getting prompt feedback, unpacking a task, which a lot of you mentioned helps avoid the planning fallacy, and then last, consider disconfirming information. So basically try and disconfirm whatever your hypothesis is, which is related to the confirmation bias. So excellent job with those. What I will do for future exams, since a lot of you mentioned liking getting prompt feedback for online quizzes, what I will do is I will separate out the multiple choice questions from the short answer questions. So that way, since it does take me time to grade the short answer questions, you'll be able to get your responses or your grade for the multiple choice questions immediately. So getting that prompt feedback, because of course I want everybody to not be subject to the overconfidence bias. So that'll be future exams, also future quizzes. So the next part of this instructional video will talk about modules 10 and 11, and I will walk through the activities for week 5.